Tessa Vaughn drove a spinning heel kick toward Jonah Brooks's head while his 10-year-old son watched from 6 feet away. Caleb's blue rules card slipped from his hand as the crowd gasped. Jonah did not raise his fists. He moved his chin less than an inch, and Tessa's heel cut through empty air close enough to stir the collar of his faded work jacket. Before her foot touched the mat, his open palm met her forearm. 2 fingers settled near her wrist. Nothing about the contact looked powerful, yet the undefeated champion suddenly found her own momentum turning against her. 1 second she was attacking. The next she was staring up at the ceiling, flat on the padded floor, while the man she had called Easy Money stood over her without having thrown a single strike. Caleb started toward his father, but an older man in a navy polo gently caught his shoulder. He stared at Jonah's hands, recognition breaking over his face. Tessa pushed herself onto one knee. Jonah stepped back and gave her room to stand. No celebration, no threat, not even a hard look. "You said one controlled demonstration," he told her. "That was not controlled." The older man released Caleb and crossed the mat. Then he said a title nobody in the Eastwood Community Athletic Center expected to hear. "Chief Brooks?" Every phone tilted closer. Who was the quiet school maintenance worker in scuffed boots, and why had a retired Navy corpsman just recognized him? If stories about dignity, restraint, and the people we misjudge mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. Because the fall on that mat was only the moment the room finally saw Jonah. The real story had begun much earlier, with a father trying to teach his son that courage did not have to be loud. That Saturday morning, Jonah stood at the stove in their small Atlanta kitchen, turning pancakes, while Caleb sat at the table with a flyer spread beside his cereal bowl. Jonah was 41, tall and lean, with medium dark brown skin, close-cropped black hair, and a neat beard beginning to show a few silver threads. He wore the same slate-gray maintenance jacket he used at work, a clean gray Henley, faded navy work pants, and brown boots scratched white at the toes. He had planned to repair a leaking faucet, buy groceries, and spend the afternoon helping Caleb build a cardboard bridge for science class. Caleb had planned something else. He tapped the flyer for the 3rd time. "The confidence fair starts at 10, he said. "You promised you'd look." Jonah slid a pancake onto his son's plate and finally read the page properly. The Eastwood Community Athletic Center was hosting a free back-to-school safety fair. There would be first aid booths, youth sports sign-ups, and a martial arts demonstration by Tessa Vaughn, a regional kickboxing champion whose face appeared on bus stop ads across the neighborhood. Her academy was offering 6 training scholarships. Caleb had circled that line in blue ink. At 10, he was small for his age, with warm brown skin, short twists, serious dark eyes, and a habit of pulling the sleeves of his mustard yellow hoodie over his hands whenever he felt exposed. 2 boys at school had started calling him Little Professor because he carried a blue notebook and preferred robotics club to football. The name itself was harmless. The shoulder checks near the lockers were not. Jonah knew about one of those shoulder checks because a teacher had called. Caleb had described the others as accidents. "You don't need to become somebody else to deserve space," Jonah had told him the night before. Caleb understood the sentence, but understanding did not make the hallway feel wider. He wanted to learn how to stand without folding inward. He wanted, though he would not say it, to know that his father could teach him how. Jonah looked at the flyer again. The words practical confidence and safe boundaries were printed beneath Tessa's photograph. He turned off the stove. "Finish eating," he said. "We'll go for an hour." Caleb smiled so quickly that Jonah had to look away for a second. 5 years had passed since Renee Brooks died after a collision caused by a driver who ran a red light. Caleb remembered her laugh, the vanilla lotion she used, and very little else. Jonah remembered enough for both of them. He remembered her telling him, during his final year in the Navy, that their son needed a father whose first answer was presence, not deployment. He had left active service at 36 and built a quieter life around school calendars, packed lunches, and a facilities job with Atlanta Public Schools. The work suited him. Broken lights announced their problem honestly. A bad motor did not care who repaired it. At 3 each afternoon, Jonah could usually be outside Caleb's school before the buses left. There were traces of his earlier life that no uniform was required to reveal. He entered crowded rooms by noticing exits. He sat where he could see doors. When a plate slipped from Caleb's hands, Jonah caught it before the boy realized it was falling. On morning walks, his pace never changed, but he could name the car that had passed them twice. Caleb treated those things as ordinary father skills. Jonah allowed him to. A locked metal box on the top shelf of the bedroom closet held discharge papers, photographs, and a small trident insignia wrapped in cloth. Jonah had not opened it in 2 years. His service was not a lie, but it was not the first truth he wanted strangers to know about him. At the athletic center, volunteers in green shirts directed families through a bright gymnasium divided into activity zones. Basketball hoops were folded against the walls. Blue mats covered the center floor. A portable stage stood beneath a banner for the Eastwood Youth Confidence Initiative. Jonah registered them at a folding table, signed the general attendance form, and accepted 2 blue wristbands. A volunteer handed Caleb a small rules card for the martial arts exhibition. Caleb read it out loud while they walked. Demonstrations require clear consent. Protective gear is mandatory. Participants begin only after the bell. Jonah nodded. Good rules. Caleb tucked the card into his notebook as carefully as if it were a certificate. Tessa Vaughn entered 20 minutes later, with 2 assistants and a videographer. She was 34, athletic and compact, with fair skin, sharp green eyes, and auburn hair pulled into a high ponytail. Her black and gold academy uniform fit like a brand campaign. Vanguard Defense curved across the back in large letters. Her public image was discipline with a smile. Parents knew her from local morning television, where she broke boards, praised hard work, and promised children they would never feel helpless again. What most people in the gym did not know was that Vanguard's second location had opened 3 months earlier, and enrollment was below projections. The city scholarship contract could fill those classes. So could a viral video. Tessa's videographer, Neil, had been instructed to capture a dramatic volunteer segment for social media. The original plan called for one of her trained assistants to wear street clothes and pretend to be an arrogant challenger. But the assistant texted that morning to say his car had broken down. Tessa refused to cut the segment. "Find me someone who looks safe," she told Neil, while adjusting the wireless microphone at her cheek. A grown man, no athlete, somebody the audience won't worry about. Neil glanced toward the bleachers. His eyes moved across Jonah's worn jacket, work pants, and scuffed boots. Then they settled on Caleb beside him. He pointed without understanding what he had selected. The program began well. Tessa taught children how to use their voices, how to step backward without crossing their feet, and how to move toward a trusted adult. Jonah agreed with most of it. Caleb copied every stance. When Tessa asked the group to shout back up, Caleb's first attempt barely reached the next row. His second carried across the mat. Jonah gave him a small nod. Caleb stood taller. For half an hour, the event was exactly what the flyer had promised. Then Neil signaled that the live stream numbers were dropping, and Tessa shifted from teaching to performing. She called 3 adult volunteers onto the mat. Each was a member of Vanguard wearing a borrowed sweatshirt over training clothes, though the audience did not know it. Tessa redirected a slow punch, completed a rehearsed sweep, and sent each man down with a clean theatrical impact. The crowd clapped. Phones rose. Neil showed her the viewer count and tilted his hand sideways. It was steady, not climbing. Tessa scanned the bleachers until she found Jonah. "Let's try someone who didn't come from my academy," she said into the microphone. "Sir in the work jacket, how about giving these families a real example?" Jonah shook his head once and pointed toward Caleb. "I'm here with my son." His answer was polite and complete. Tessa smiled as if refusal were part of the show. She asked his name. He gave only his first. "Jonah, this is a confidence fair," she said. "You don't want the kids thinking confidence means hiding in the last row, do you?" A few adults laughed, more from discomfort than amusement. Caleb looked from Tessa to his father. Jonah rested one hand on the boy's shoulder. "Watching is enough for us. Continue your program." That was the first chance Tessa had to stop. She could have laughed, chosen another volunteer, and protected everything she claimed to teach. Instead, she heard the audience quiet and mistook quiet for permission to push. Neil pointed to the viewer count. It had started rising. Tessa stepped off the mat and walked toward the bleachers, microphone still live. "Come on," she said. "Work boots, tough jacket, serious face. This is easy money for me." The phrase drew a sharper laugh. Jonah's jaw tightened, but his hand stayed gentle on Caleb's shoulder. "No thank you," he said a second time. Tessa should have stopped then. She had received a second clear refusal. in a room where her own printed rules required consent. But humiliation had begun producing the attention her teaching had not. Neil's phone showed comments multiplying. Tessa turned to Caleb. "What's your name, young man?" Caleb pulled his sleeves over his hands. Jonah answered before he could. "Leave him out of this." The warmth dropped from Jonah's voice, not replaced by anger, but by a boundary so clean that several adults stopped smiling. Tessa felt the room pulling away from her, and reached for control the way she always did, by raising the stakes. "Your dad brought you to learn confidence," she told Caleb. "Maybe he can show us what fear looks like first." The laughter disappeared completely. Caleb's face went still. Jonah looked down at him and saw the same expression the boy wore after pretending a hallway shove had been an accident. A child calculating whether an adult's cruelty was somehow his fault. Jonah could absorb a stranger's insult. What he would not do was let Caleb carry it home as proof that quiet men had to accept whatever louder people assigned them. Jonah stood. He removed his maintenance jacket, folded it once, and placed it on the empty bleacher seat. Underneath, his gray Henley revealed a lean frame, not the sculpted build of a competitive fighter. A pale surgical line crossed the back of his right shoulder and disappeared beneath the sleeve. He handed Caleb the jacket. "Stay by the chair. Keep the rules card." Caleb gripped the folded jacket against his chest. "Dad, you don't have to." Jonah met his eyes. "I know." Then he walked toward the mat. The room responded with the low, restless sound of people realizing entertainment had become something less comfortable. Tessa smiled again, but it no longer reached her eyes. She led Jonah to the center and told the audience she would demonstrate how technique overcame size. Jonah asked for the terms. Tessa blinked. He repeated the question. "What exactly are you demonstrating?" She said one controlled attack, one defensive response, no head contact, and a stop at the bell. Jonah pointed toward the rules table. "Protective gear." Tessa waved the concern away. "We won't need it. This will take 3 seconds." Marlene Ortiz, the athletic center director, stepped closer from the registration area. She was a practical woman in her 50s who had negotiated the city agreement with Vanguard. "Tessa, use the gloves and headgear," she said. "The waiver requires them." Tessa kept her smile aimed at the audience. "He's not sparring. He's helping with a movement demonstration." Jonah looked at Marlene. "I consent to one slow, controlled demonstration after the bell. Nothing else." Marlene nodded and repeated the sentence for Neil's camera. That recorded exchange would matter later. Tessa heard it. She simply believed she could control what counted as slow once the action began. Caleb stood at the edge of the bleachers with the blue rules card in one hand and his father's jacket in the other. Near him sat Elias Grant, a 62-year-old black man with close-cut silver hair, a trimmed gray mustache, and a slight limp. Elias wore a navy polo bearing the Recreation Department seal because he served as a volunteer safety advisor for city youth programs. Before retirement, he had spent 24 years as a Navy hospital corpsman, including assignments alongside special operations units. He had noticed Jonah earlier, though only as a face that tugged at a distant memory. Now he watched the way Jonah placed his feet. The memory moved closer. Jonah did not raise a fighting guard. He stood with his hands open at chest height, palms visible, his left foot half a step behind the right. To the audience, it looked almost passive. To Elias, it looked familiar. Open hands lowered the temperature of a confrontation while protecting the center line. Weight balanced over the arches allowed movement in any direction. Jonah's eyes stayed on Tessa's shoulders and hips. The places an attack announced itself before fists or feet moved. Elias leaned forward. He had seen that exact economy in a steel compartment half a world away. Tessa asked Jonah whether he had ever trained. He could have answered fully. Instead, he said, "Enough to know this should stay controlled." She laughed into the microphone. That's what men say when they watched a few videos and don't want to admit it. She turned toward the crowd. "Remember, confidence is not pretending you know something. Confidence is testing it." Jonah glanced at the bell on the table. Nobody had touched it. He looked toward Marlene. "Are we starting?" Marlene lifted one hand, ready to signal. Tessa moved before Marlene brought it down. Her first attack was a fast jab meant to stop an inch from Jonah's face, or that was what she later claimed. In the video, her shoulder committed and the fist traveled directly toward his nose. Jonah shifted outside the line by the width of 2 fingers. The punch missed. He did not counter. Tessa followed with a low kick toward his thigh. harder than any demonstration required. Jonah lifted his shin just enough to absorb and deflect the strike without changing balance. The contact made a flat crack across the gym. Caleb flinched. Jonah's eyes never left Tessa's center. Marlene called, "Stop, reset." Jonah stepped back at once. Tessa did not. The miss had embarrassed her, and the blocked kick had told the audience something she had not planned for them to know. She was not directing this exchange. She was trying to catch up to it. "He moved early," she said. "Let's do it clean." Jonah shook his head. "The demonstration is over." He turned slightly toward Caleb. The clearest exit was 2 steps away. He intended to take it. Tessa reached for his wrist. It was not a strike, but it was not permission either. Jonah released the grip by rotating toward the opening at her thumb, a basic movement performed so smoothly her hand seemed to slide off him on its own. A few people murmured. Tessa heard admiration in the sound and felt it moving in the wrong direction. "Don't walk away after cheating the setup," she said. "Face me properly." Jonah kept both hands open. "You agreed to control. You broke the agreement twice. We're done." That was her final opportunity. Marlene was already crossing the mat. Neil lowered his camera a fraction. Even Tessa's assistant whispered her name as a warning. But the live stream count had doubled, and Tessa's pride reduced the room to a single unbearable image. A man in work clothes leaving, while people wondered whether she could stop him. She stepped back, loaded her right hip, and launched the spinning heel kick that opened this story. Caleb saw it first. "Dad," he shouted. The blue rules card fell from his hand. Jonah heard the pivot against the vinyl mat. His chin moved less than an inch. Tessa's heel passed his face, fast enough to snap the air. Jonah stepped into the space behind the kick, where its power no longer existed. His left palm guided her forearm. 2 fingers of his right hand settled above her wrist. He did not pull her down. He gave her turning body a path it could not recover from, redirected the shoulder, protected her head with his forearm, and let gravity finish what her momentum had begun. Tessa landed on her back with a hard breath but no injury. Jonah released her. Before the mat stopped moving, he retreated 3 steps, palms still visible, and looked first at Caleb, not at the champion. "I'm okay," he said. Only then did he look down at Tessa. "Stay still for a second. Make sure your neck is fine." His voice carried no triumph. That absence struck the crowd harder than a victory pose would have. The man she had tried to humiliate was checking whether she was hurt. Tessa stared at the ceiling. Her chest rose and fell. She had been thrown before, hundreds of times, by people stronger and heavier than Jonah. This felt different because he had not fought her. He had removed himself from each attack until her final choice left him no safe exit, then used only enough control to end the danger. She sat up slowly. Jonah did not offer a hand until she looked directly at it. When she accepted, he helped her stand without pulling her off balance. "You won," Tessa said. The microphone caught it. Jonah shook his head. This wasn't supposed to be a fight. The sentence stripped away the last defense available to her. If it had been a fight, she could blame a bad day or an unfamiliar opponent, but she had turned a youth safety lesson into a public test of ego. Jonah had simply refused to let that decision injure him or reach his son. Elias Grant stepped onto the mat. He had picked up the blue rules card and handed it back to Caleb before approaching. Up close, he saw the small crescent scar at Jonah's right temple and the surgical line on the shoulder. More than that, he recognized the careful way Jonah had protected Tessa's head during the fall. "Chief Brooks?" he asked. Jonah's face changed for the first time, not with fear, but with the guarded recognition of a locked door opening. He studied Elias, then exhaled. "Doc Grant." Elias smiled once, though his eyes had gone wet. "I thought that was you." Marlene asked what he meant. Elias looked at Jonah rather than the crowd, giving him the choice. Jonah could have denied it or asked him to stop. Instead, he glanced at Caleb. His son was holding the jacket tightly, waiting. Jonah gave Elias a small nod. The older man turned toward the room. Jonah Brooks served 12 years in the United States Navy. He was a Navy SEAL and later a team chief. I was a corpsman attached to his unit. I treated that shoulder after an operation off the Horn of Africa. More important, I watched him spend months teaching younger men how to end danger without feeding their pride. The gym went so quiet that the faint buzz of the scoreboard became audible. Tessa's expression emptied. The work jacket, the boots, the calm refusals, and the movement she had been unable to read rearranged themselves into one truth. She had not selected easy money. She had selected a man whose discipline had been built under circumstances her championship record could not simulate, yet Jonah's eyes held no satisfaction. "Former Navy SEAL," he corrected. "I've been a school maintenance electrician for 5 years. That's the job my son knows." Caleb crossed the edge of the mat only after Jonah waved him forward. He handed back the jacket, then looked at Elias. "Did my dad fight people?" The question was exactly 10 years old. Direct, frightened, curious. Elias crouched as far as his stiff knee allowed. "Your dad protected people," he said. "Sometimes those things were close together. He worked very hard to know the difference." Caleb considered that, then looked at Tessa. She didn't wait for the bell. He held up the rules card. "It says everybody has to wait." Marlene took the card and asked Neil to stop the live stream. She then requested the complete recording, including the minutes before Jonah stepped onto the mat. Tessa started to say the exchange had become unscripted, but Marlene interrupted her. Unscripted is why the rules matter more, not less. The video showed Jonah refusing twice. It captured Tessa directing the insult toward Caleb, dismissing protective gear, agreeing to a slow demonstration, attacking before the bell, ignoring a stop command, grabbing Jonah as he left, and launching the final kick. Nothing needed interpretation. Marlene announced that Vanguard's remaining demonstrations were canceled for the day. The 6 city-funded scholarships would not be awarded through Tessa's academy until a safety review was completed. Families who had enrolled at the event could cancel without penalty. Tessa's assistants removed the academy banner while the crowd watched in a silence that was not cruel, only sober. This was not an empire collapsing or a champion losing everything in one afternoon. It was a professional consequence tied directly to a professional failure. She had violated consent at an event meant to teach boundaries. Tessa asked to speak. Marlene hesitated, then handed her a separate microphone. Tessa faced Jonah first. "I chose you because I thought people would laugh if I beat you," she said. "When you said no, I made your son part of it because I wanted the crowd back. Then I ignored the rules I printed." Her voice tightened. "There isn't a version of that where I'm the victim because I fell." She turned toward Caleb. "I used your fear to pressure your dad. That was wrong. I'm sorry." Caleb looked at Jonah before answering. Jonah did not nod for him or tell him what forgiveness required. Caleb made his own choice. "You made everybody laugh at him," he said. "I didn't like that." Tessa swallowed. "You shouldn't have had to." Caleb did not say he forgave her. He did not need to. An apology was not a key that forced the injured person to open a door. Jonah placed his hand on Caleb's shoulder and said, "We're going home." As they crossed the gym, a man who had laughed at the phrase "easy money" stepped out of their path and lowered his phone. He tried to apologize to Jonah, but Jonah pointed toward Caleb. The man crouched and said he was sorry for joining a joke that was not funny. Caleb did not know what to do with the apology, so he said, "Okay," and kept walking. 2 other parents followed, less polished and more embarrassed. One admitted she had known Tessa was crossing a line and had waited for someone with authority to stop it. Jonah told her, authority was never required to say the boy should be left alone. She looked back toward the mat, absorbing the fact that every adult in the room had been given the same 2 chances Tessa ignored. Near the exit, Elias caught up with them. He and Jonah stood facing each other for a moment. 2 men measuring years neither could summarize in a gym doorway. Elias asked whether Jonah still had the old number. Jonah said no. Elias wrote his own on the back of a recreation brochure and gave it to Caleb. "Make sure your father calls an old medic before we're both too stubborn to remember anything correctly." Caleb smiled. Jonah almost did. He folded the brochure and put it in his jacket pocket. In the parking lot, the attention finally reached Caleb. His hands began shaking only after the building doors closed behind them. Jonah crouched between 2 parked cars, bringing himself level with his son. "Look at me. Breathe in for 4. Caleb followed. "Hold for 2. Out for 4. They repeated it until the boy's shoulders lowered. "Were you scared?" Caleb asked. Jonah answered without protecting his image. "Yes, not of her kick. I was scared you would think a man has to hurt somebody to prove he isn't weak." Caleb stared at the red toes of his sneakers. "But you could have hurt her." Jonah nodded. "That's why I had to be careful." The answer seemed to trouble Caleb more than a simple victory would have. "Why didn't you tell me you were a SEAL?" Jonah sat on the curb beside him. Cars moved slowly through the lot. Somewhere near the entrance, volunteers were restarting the first aid presentation. Because I wanted you to know the man who makes breakfast, fixes school lights, and checks your math homework before you knew the man I used to be. I was afraid the old job would become the biggest thing you saw. Caleb leaned against his shoulder. It's not bigger than pancakes. Jonah laughed once, the first easy sound he had made all day. Those are very good pancakes. They sat until the tremor left Caleb's hands. Then Jonah asked whether he still wanted martial arts lessons. Caleb thought carefully. Maybe, but not there. Jonah agreed. Confidence was not something a child should have to purchase from a person who confused fear with obedience. Monday morning brought a different kind of test. A shortened clip had already reached several students before Caleb walked through the school doors. One boy near the lockers called Jonah a secret assassin, and another asked Caleb whether his father could break a person's neck. Caleb froze, caught between pride and a fear he could not explain. Then he remembered the open hands. He didn't hit her, Caleb said. She broke the rules, and he stopped her. The boys wanted a more exciting answer. Caleb repeated the same one. By lunch, the story had become less dramatic and more accurate. For the first time, he understood that confidence could sound like a sentence spoken twice, without making it louder. That evening, Jonah found Caleb writing in the blue notebook. The page was divided into two columns. On one side, Caleb had written things people think strength is: winning, yelling, making someone scared. On the other, he had written what strength did: stopped, protected, listened. Jonah did not correct the grammar or turn the page into a lesson. He sat beside him and asked where pancakes belonged. Caleb drew a line beneath listened and wrote feeds people. Jonah accepted the classification. The ordinary joke did more to settle the day than any explanation about military service could have. The safety review took 3 weeks. The city did not ban Tessa from teaching forever, nor did it pretend one public apology repaired the choices that led to it. Vanguard lost its Eastwood scholarship contract for the semester. Tessa was required to complete a coaching ethics course, renew her youth safety certification, and submit a written consent protocol before applying again. Marlene added a new rule for all future demonstrations. No instructor could select a spectator from the crowd. Volunteers would register in advance, a second safety officer would control the bell, and any refusal ended the invitation immediately. At the review meeting, Tessa watched the unedited footage without a lawyer or publicist beside her. Marlene paused after each point where the event could have ended safely. Jonah's first refusal, his second, the protective gear warning, the stop command, and his attempt to walk away. 5 exits. Tessa had ignored all 5 because each one required accepting that the crowd was no longer hers to control. The ethics instructor asked what she would teach a student who behaved that way. Tessa answered, "That skill doesn't excuse a boundary violation." Then she heard how closely the answer described her. Losing the contract hurt her business. Seeing her own conduct without the noise of applause hurt in a place a balance sheet could not measure. Neil supplied the unedited video rather than the dramatic clip Tessa first wanted posted. The full recording spread locally, but the moment people shared most was not the fall. It was Jonah stepping back with open hands and saying the demonstration was over. Parents wrote that they had shown that section to their children when talking about boundaries. Martial arts coaches used it in staff meetings to discuss why technical skill without consent was not discipline. Jonah declined every interview. He asked the athletic center to keep Caleb's face out of future posts, and Marlene honored the request. Jonah also asked Marlene to direct any advertising revenue from the center's official video toward a neutral scholarship fund, not Vanguard and not his family. The center created 4 places for children who wanted non-competitive martial arts training, but could not afford monthly fees. Elias helped review the instructors. None of the scholarships carried Jonah's name. He wanted the change to survive without turning his son into a symbol or himself into a brand. When Marlene thanked him, Jonah reminded her that Caleb had kept the rules card after every adult around him forgot what it said. The first credit belonged to the child who noticed the bell had never rung. Tessa sent one letter to their home. It contained no excuse and no request that Jonah help repair her reputation. She wrote that the silence after Caleb said she had not waited for the bell stayed with her more than the online criticism. She had built a business around teaching people to say no, then punished a man for doing exactly that. She was stepping away from public demonstrations until she could teach the lesson without betraying it. Jonah read the letter once and placed it in a kitchen drawer. Caleb asked whether that meant she had become good. Jonah said, "It means she has started doing the work. Starting matters. So does what she does next." Elias came to dinner the following Sunday carrying an old photograph in a plain envelope. He asked Jonah's permission before showing it to Caleb. The picture held 6 tired men on the deck of a ship, dressed in dusty gear. None posed like heroes. Jonah stood near the edge, younger and clean-shaven, one hand resting on the shoulder of a medic with black hair and an unlined face. Caleb looked from the photograph to Elias's silver hair. "That's you?" Elias laughed. "I was handsome once." Jonah said nothing. "Your father still owes me $20, Elias added. The story that followed involved a card game, not a battlefield. That was the first thing Caleb learned about Jonah's service. His father was terrible at bluffing when the stakes were small. Other truths came slowly. Jonah explained that he had trained hard, made mistakes, lost friends, and learned that the ability to use force created a greater duty to avoid it. He did not give operational details a child did not need. He did not turn pain into legend. Caleb listened until the questions ran out, then asked if they could work on the cardboard bridge. Jonah cleared the plates, and Elias stayed to help cut the support beams. A month later, Caleb joined a beginner judo class at a small non-profit gym recommended by Elias. The instructor, Coach Naomi Price, began the first session by asking every child to practice 2 words before learning a fall: no and stop. She explained that tapping ended a hold immediately, no questions and no teasing. Parents were welcome to watch, but nobody would be pulled onto the mat for entertainment. Jonah sat in the front row wearing his slate gray maintenance jacket. For the first 2 classes, Caleb checked that he was still there after every exercise. On the 3rd Saturday, Coach Naomi paired fathers and children for a balance drill. Participation was optional. Caleb carried 2 foam pads to Jonah and asked, "Do you consent?" He pronounced the last word with exaggerated seriousness. Jonah looked at the blue pad, then at his son's grin. One slow, controlled demonstration after the bell. Caleb laughed. Coach Naomi rang a small brass bell. Caleb placed 2 fingers against Jonah's wrist, tried to guide his balance, and discovered his father was much harder to move than he looked. Jonah let himself sway just enough for Caleb to feel the technique work. Not a fake collapse, not a gift disguised as praise, just enough room for the boy to understand alignment. Caleb reset his feet and tried again. This time Jonah stepped onto the second pad. "I moved you," Caleb said. "You did." The boy's face brightened, then grew thoughtful. "Dad, was that what you did to Tessa?" Jonah shook his head. "No. What happened with her was stopping danger. This is practice. Practice only works when both people agree to be there." After class, Caleb stopped at the gym door, where sunlight stretched across the floor. He asked one final question. If being strong isn't making people fall, what is it? Jonah looked back at the children returning pads, at Coach Naomi listening when a small girl said she wanted to sit out, and at Elias waiting near the entrance with 2 cups of coffee. Then he looked at his son. "Strength is having choices," he said, "and choosing the one that keeps people safe." Caleb nodded, not because he understood every part of the answer, but because he understood enough for that day. He took Jonah's hand as they walked toward the parking lot. The scuffed boots and old work jacket looked exactly as they had the morning Tessa chose him for easy money. Nothing visible had changed. That was the point. Jonah had never needed a military title to deserve respect. The title only revealed how little the crowd had known when it laughed. At home, the blue rules card hung on the refrigerator beside Caleb's science grade. Not as a souvenir of the day his father defeated a champion, but as a reminder of the line everyone in that gym should have honored before a foot touched the mat. Consent was not weakness, restraint was not fear, and the quietest man in the room did not become strong when someone finally recognized his past. He had been strong when he said no the first time.